The RIS, or Radio Investigation Service, was the enforcement arm of the Radio Communications Agency, which was eventually amalgamated into Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator. It was responsible for protecting authorised users of the radio spectrum from interference caused either by other users or non-radio sources. Its headquarters was in London, and the country was divided into 5 regions. Each region was then divided into sub-districts, each with a district manager who controlled them on a day-to-day basis. The district manager was assisted by a secretary who responded to inquiries from the general public and licensees. They also dealt with field officers' queries and gave them information over the radio. Now, there were quite a few frequencies used by the Radio Investigation Service in the UHF band, such as 455.200, 455.225 and 455.250. These were used for passing on information over the radio as well as surveillance and field operations. The secretary also recorded investigations on the district computer back at the office, and each office had a well-equipped workshop for maintenance and the testing of suspect and seized equipment. The first priority of the RIS was to the various safety of life services whose radio systems could often mean the difference between life and death. The RIS would also visit firms that use PMR systems to make sure that their equipment met the specifications contained in the licence document. These inspections were repeated at intervals to ensure that the radio was maintained correctly and no unauthorised changes had been made that could have caused interference. Field agents also made visits at communal sites as well that served many different users. They would also inspect marine radio installations on both boats and land-based stations to ensure that licences were up to date and radio operators had their certificates of competence. Another important piece of work carried out was checks and maintenance on air traffic service radios and radars in use both on the ground and in all kinds of aircraft. From time to time, neighbours of radio amateurs would attribute interference to their TV or radio to the amateur next door, and a complaint would lead to a visit from the RIS. A period of time would be given for the radio amateur and their neighbour to sort the issue themselves before the RIS would step in and provide remedial action after making sure that the correct equipment, frequency of operation and power output was used. When a complaint was received in regard to a CB operator, the RIS would visit to check that no illegal attachments were in use and that the equipment was operated correctly. In addition, many pirate radio stations caused interference to licensed radio users, which would lead to direction finding to pinpoint the station. Some cases of interference could be quite complex and necessitate the use of mobile labs equipped with pump-up masts and test equipment to track and locate interference sources. These investigative operations would require plenty of evidence gathering, such as recordings and interviews. And this is where equipment such as this Neil 6504K surveillance recorder comes in.
Yes, they don't like it, do they? They turned up in Peugeots and they went away in ambulances. Oh my God, they've turned up and they bust all these pirate radio stations around Brom with no trouble whatsoever. And then they turned up to see me. You'll notice they've not come back, I mean, wonder why they've not bothered to come back, what is it? Fear? This is a call!
This is an ex-Radio Communications Agency example that still carries its serial number and was used out in the field to gather recordings of instances of interference and illegal or suspect radio use. They were used widely by the Radio Communications Agency as well as Ofcom in mobile surveillance units and the Baldock radio monitoring station. This model was also used by the police in interview rooms. Now, I picked this up quite a while ago and mainly for the tapes it came with. this handful of White Neil interview cassettes. I saw them and rushed home with them, hoping and praying there would be some sort of radio surveillance recordings on them, but unfortunately upon listening to them, I found that they'd all been completely wiped. In 2003, the Radio Communications Agency was amalgamated into Ofcom, who still calls upon the radio monitoring station at Baldock, which is situated in a radio quiet valley just north of London. To this day, it is still the UK hub for all spectrum monitoring activities, and it's listening in every minute of every day. Now, there's quite a lot to be said about Ofcom within the radio community, and despite popular belief and the fact that they have a huge range of responsibilities that doesn't just cover amateur radio, they do police the spectrum and shut down people who abuse it. Baldock is usually the first contact in regards to cases of serious interference, before being gradually phased out in favour of newer and more sophisticated equipment. The duty officer would activate the network of RMDFs to get a fix on any rogue signals. These remote monitoring and direction finding arrays were strategically placed around the country and could pinpoint a signal to within 1 square kilometre. The local investigation team were then scrambled to home in on the source of the signal. To make things much easier, the RMDF system was complemented by the UMS, or Unmanned Monitoring System. This continuously took snapshots of RF activities in towns across the UK to build a live and constantly updated picture of the radio spectrum in a particular area. The system could scan 2,000 channels per second and digitise and store information in real time. This meant that if Ofcom or the authorities wanted to know where and when a specific frequency was being used, UMS could tell. This was not only ideal for tracing unlicensed users and interference, but spectrum planning. But UMS is perhaps a topic for another video.